Have you ever wondered what dining out was like in 1970s Britain? Before the era of gastropubs and food delivery apps, the UK had its own unique restaurant scene that has now almost completely vanished. But here's the shocking truth. Despite once having hundreds of locations across Britain, most of these beloved establishments have disappeared without a trace. Join me as we explore 15 British restaurants from the 1970s that no longer exist. The Little Chef was once as much a part of British road trips as arguments over directions and the inevitable "Are we there yet?" from the back seat. Founded in 1958, this roadside restaurant chain became a familiar sight along Britain's highways throughout the 1970s, with its distinctive red and white logo featuring a chubby chef that could be spotted from miles away. The Little Chef experience was all about comfort and familiarity. After hours of driving, families would pull in for their famous Olympic breakfast. A mighty feast of eggs, bacon, sausages, mushrooms, tomatoes, and fried bread that could fuel you for the rest of your journey. Their pancakes with maple syrup were another favourite, especially among children who'd been promised a treat for good behaviour in the car. What made Little Chef special wasn't just the food, it was the reliability. No matter which of the 439 restaurants you visited across the UK, you knew exactly what you were getting. But as motorway service stations became more sophisticated and fast food chains offered quicker alternatives, Little Chef struggled to keep up. The last restaurant closed in 2018, marking the end of a true British institution. If you enjoyed roadside dining memories, hit like and subscribe for more vanished British food institutions. If you wanted to impress someone in the 1970s, perhaps a first date or celebrating a special occasion, Berni Inn was where you headed. Founded by brothers Frank and Aldo Berni in 1955, this chain revolutionised dining out in Britain by bringing affordable luxury to the masses. Walking into a Berni Inn was like stepping into another world. The dark wood panelling, red faux leather seating and soft lighting created an atmosphere of sophistication that made even a Tuesday night dinner feel special. The menu was simple but effective. Prawn cocktail to start, steak and chips for main, and Black Forest Gâteau for dessert, all washed down with a glass of Blue Nun or a Mateus Rosé. This wasn't just a meal, it was the meal of the 1970s, the formula that defined eating out for an entire generation. For many Britons, their first experience of dining in a restaurant was at a Berni Inn, and the chain expanded to over 147 restaurants at its peak. By the 1980s, however, tastes were changing. In 1995, Berni Inn was sold to Whitbread and converted into their Beefeater and Brewers Fayre chains, taking with it those iconic prawn cocktails forever. The Lyons Corner Houses were magnificent temples to dining that dominated London's West End from the 1920s to the 1970s. These vast multi-storey establishments could seat up to 2,000 people at a time and employed hundreds of the famous nippies, waitresses in distinctive black and white uniforms who were known for their efficient service. In the 1970s, a visit to a Lyons Corner House was still a grand experience. The interiors were opulent, with marble floors, grand staircases, and ornate ceilings. Live orchestras played as you dined, adding to the sense of occasion. The food was traditional British fare. Roast meats, fish dishes, and elaborate desserts served from trolleys wheeled to your table. What made the corner houses special was their democratic nature. Unlike many fine dining establishments, they welcomed everyone. Shoppers could pop in for tea and cake, businessmen could have lunch meetings, and families could enjoy a special dinner out. But by the 1970s, the corner houses were struggling. Changing tastes, rising costs, and the growth of fast food meant these grand dining palaces were becoming outdated. The last Lyons Corner House closed in 1977, marking the end of an era in British dining. Remember the nippies? Share your Lyons memories in the comments and subscribe for weekly nostalgia. If Little Chef had a cheeky younger brother, it was Happy Eater. Established in 1973, Happy Eater was a roadside restaurant chain that competed directly with Little Chef, offering a similar concept, but with a more family-focused approach. The Happy Eater experience was defined by its child-friendly atmosphere. The restaurants featured distinctive yellow and red signage with a logo of a smiling face licking its lips, a design that perfectly captured the chain's playful approach to dining. Inside, the restaurants were bright and cheerful, with colourful furniture and play areas that kept children entertained while parents enjoyed a moment of peace. The menu was classic British roadside fare. All-day breakfasts, burgers, sandwiches, and traditional main meals like fish and chips or chicken in a basket. But what really set Happy Eater apart were the desserts. The funny face ice cream, a scoop of vanilla with sweets and sauce arranged to create a face, was a particular favourite among children. Happy Eater reached its peak with around 90 restaurants across the UK. However, in 1996, the chain was acquired by Grandeur, who also owned Little Chef, and by 1998, the Happy Eater brand had disappeared from Britain's roadsides. Before Pizza Hut and Domino's dominated the British pizza scene, there was Pizzaland. Launched in the early 1970s, Pizzaland was one of the first chain restaurants to introduce many Britons to the concept of pizza, a food that was still considered exotic by many at the time. Pizzaland restaurants were instantly recognisable with their red and green colour scheme and casual, family-friendly atmosphere. The interiors were designed to evoke an Italian trattoria, albeit a very British interpretation of one, with checkered tablecloths, Chianti bottles as candle holders, and walls decorated with stereotypical Italian scenes. The menu was centered around pizza, of course, with toppings that would make an Italian chef weep. The Hawaiian with ham and pineapple was particularly popular, as was the Four Seasons, which divided the pizza into quarters with different toppings on each. But Pizzaland also offered pasta dishes, garlic bread, and their famous ice cream factory dessert where children could create their own sundaes. By the 1990s, however, competition in the pizza market was fierce. In 1996, Pizzaland was acquired by Pizza Hut, and the brand gradually disappeared as restaurants were either converted or closed. The Golden Egg was a chain of cafeterias that became a familiar sight on British high streets throughout the 1960s and 1970s. With their distinctive yellow and white colour scheme and egg-shaped signage, they were hard to miss. And for many Britons, they were a regular part of shopping trips and days out. What made Golden Egg special was its accessibility. It wasn't fancy or pretentious. It was a place where anyone could go for a quick, affordable meal in clean, bright surroundings. The cafeterias operated on a self-service basis, with customers queuing up with trays to select their food from a counter before finding a seat. The menu was classic British cafe fare. Eggs, of course, cooked in various ways: bacon, sausages, beans, chips, sandwiches, and simple main meals like fish and chips or pie and mash. Tea was served in thick white cups, and there was always a selection of cakes and puddings for those with a sweet tooth. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, however, changing tastes and increased competition led to the decline of Golden Egg. The chain was eventually absorbed by other companies, and the distinctive yellow and white cafeterias disappeared from British high streets. ABC tea shops were a familiar sight on British high streets from the 1910s through to the 1970s. Founded by the Aerated Bread Company, hence ABC. These tea shops offered a respectable, affordable place for people to enjoy tea and light refreshments in an era when dining out options were limited, especially for women. By the 1970s, ABC tea shops had evolved from their Victorian origins but still maintained an air of genteel respectability. The interiors were typically bright and clean, with simple furniture and often marble-top tables. Waitresses in neat uniforms provided table service, bringing pots of tea on trays along with sandwiches, cakes, and simple hot meals. What made ABC tea shops special was their accessibility and reliability. They weren't fashionable or exciting, but they provided a dependable experience. You knew exactly what you were getting. The menu was quintessentially British. Tea served in proper teapots with china cups, cucumber sandwiches with the crusts cut off, scones with jam and cream, and a selection of cakes and pastries displayed under glass domes on the counter. By the end of the 1970s, ABC tea shops had largely disappeared from British high streets, unable to compete with more modern cafes. Miss proper tea served in china cups? Subscribe now for more forgotten British culinary traditions. The National Milk Bars were a chain of cafes that flourished in Britain from the 1930s to the 1970s, offering a unique dining experience centred around dairy products. Founded by Robert Hurst, these establishments promoted milk as a healthy alternative to alcohol, providing a family-friendly environment where people of all ages could socialise. By the 1970s, National Milk Bars had evolved from their temperance movement origins but still maintained their focus on milk-based refreshments. The interiors were typically bright and modern, with formica tables, vinyl seating, and a long counter where customers could sit on stools and watch their drinks being prepared. What made National Milk Bars special was their unique menu. While they served simple meals and snacks, the stars of the show were the milk-based drinks. Milkshakes in various flavours, hot milk with different additions, and milk cocktails that combine milk with fruit syrups and other non-alcoholic ingredients. Ice cream sodas and sundaes were also popular, especially with younger customers. As the 1970s progressed, changing social habits and the rise of fast food restaurants led to the decline of the National Milk Bars, with the last ones closing in the early 1980s. Wheeler's of St James's was the epitome of sophisticated dining in 1970s London. Founded by Bernard Walsh, who purchased the original Wheeler's Oyster Bar in Whitstable, the St James's branch became the flagship of what would grow into a small chain of high-end seafood restaurants. Walking into Wheeler's in the 1970s was like entering a different world, one of luxury, refinement, and impeccable service. The restaurant was famous for its seafood, particularly its oysters, which were displayed on ice at the bar. The menu featured classic dishes like Dover sole, lobster thermidor, and prawn cocktail, all prepared with a level of skill and attention to detail that justified the premium prices. Wheeler's was a favourite haunt of celebrities, politicians, and business leaders. It was the kind of place where deals were struck over long lunches, where famous faces could dine in relative privacy, and where the maitre d' knew all the regulars by name. The wine list was extensive and expensive, featuring the finest French vintages. By the 1990s, changing tastes and economic pressures led to Wheeler's decline. The brand was eventually acquired by Marco Pierre White, but the original Wheeler's of St James's, with its 1970s glamour, is now just a memory. Bulista was not just a restaurant, it was an institution. Founded by the legendary French chef Marcel Bulista in 1925, it continued to be one of London's most prestigious dining establishments well into the 1970s. Located in Covent Garden, Bulista offered authentic French cuisine at a time when foreign food was still considered exotic by many Britons. The restaurant's interior was elegant and traditional, with white tablecloths, fine china, and attentive waiters in formal attire. The lighting was soft, the atmosphere hushed, and the overall experience was one of refined luxury. Bulista was where you went when you wanted to impress, whether for a romantic dinner, a business lunch, or a special celebration. The menu featured classic French dishes prepared with the finest ingredients: coq au vin, beef bourguignon, sole et meunière, and crêpes Suzette flambéed at the table. The wine list was predominantly French, with an emphasis on the great chateaux of Bordeaux and Burgundy. Bulista represented a style of dining that was formal, unhurried, and focused on quality rather than innovation. The restaurant finally closed its doors in 1994, unable to compete with newer, more fashionable establishments, marking the end of an era in London's culinary history. Brown's Restaurant, not to be confused with today's Brown's chain of brasseries, was a singular culinary institution in 1970s London. Located in Mayfair, the original Brown's was founded in the 1960s and quickly established itself as the favourite haunt of the capital's media and advertising crowd, visiting celebrities and the occasional royal. Unlike the polished corporate Brown's restaurants we see dotted around London today, the original had a bohemian charm that couldn't be replicated. The interior was stylishly eclectic rather than uniformly designed, with bentwood chairs, white tablecloths, and walls adorned with an ever-changing collection of contemporary art and photographs from local artists. It was gloriously inconsistent, with each room having its own distinct character. The original Brown's menu was handwritten daily, offering a mix of British classics and continental dishes that reflected the growing sophistication of British diners in the 1970s. Today's Browns serves a standardized menu across all locations, but the original prided itself on unpredictability and seasonal innovation. The wine list was personally curated by the owner, featuring both established vineyards and exciting newcomers that you wouldn't find elsewhere. Despite its popularity, the original Browns closed in the early 1990s, a victim of changing tastes and rising Mayfair rents. The name was later acquired by a restaurant group who expanded it into the chain we know today, smart and reliable, but lacking the authentic character that made the original Browns a true one-off. Miss the original Browns? Subscribe now for more lost restaurants that shaped Britain's dining history. The Trokadero grill rooms, located in the heart of London's West End, were a glamorous dining destination throughout the 1970s. Part of the larger Trokadero complex, which included a cinema and other entertainment venues, the grill rooms offered a taste of luxury dining at prices that were accessible to the middle classes on special occasions. The interior was a perfect example of 1970s opulence. Plush red carpets, ornate chandeliers, mirrored walls, and tables set with heavy silverware and crystal glasses. The waiters wore formal attire and provided silver service, adding to the sense of occasion that dining at the Trokadero created. The menu was classic continental cuisine with a British twist, prawn cocktail, French onion soup, steak Diane flambéed at the table, and Black Forest Gâteau were all popular choices. The Trokadero was particularly famous for its pre-theatre dinners, where West End audiences would gather before a show, creating a buzzing atmosphere of anticipation and excitement. As the 1980s progressed, the Trokadero began to feel dated, and it eventually closed as part of the redevelopment of the entire complex. Today's diners, accustomed to more casual environments, would find the formality and theatricality of the Trokadero grill rooms both fascinating and slightly intimidating. Leargo Bianu was one of London's most authentic French restaurants during the 1970s. Located in Soho, it offered sophisticated French cuisine at a time when continental dining was still considered the height of culinary sophistication in Britain. The restaurant was intimate and atmospheric, with low lighting, crisp white tablecloths, and walls adorned with French posters and artwork. The waiters were predominantly French, adding to the authentic experience, and the maître d' would greet regular customers by name, making them feel like part of an exclusive club. As the name suggests, snails were a specialty, served in the traditional manner with garlic butter and special tongs and forks. Other classic French dishes like coq au vin, bouillabaisse, and crème brûlée featured prominently on the menu. The wine list was exclusively French, with a particular emphasis on Burgundy and Bordeaux. Leargo Bianu was popular with theatre-goers, artists and media types who appreciated its authentic cuisine and bohemian Soho location. The restaurant eventually closed in the late 1980s as tastes changed, and a new wave of fusion cuisine began to dominate London's dining scene. The Post House was a chain of hotels with restaurants that became a familiar sight across Britain in the 1970s. Owned by Trust House Fort, these hotels occupied a middle market position, offering comfortable accommodation and reliable dining for business travellers and families alike. The restaurants within Post House hotels were typically called the Brasserie, or the Grill, and they offered a standardised menu that combined British classics with continental dishes that were becoming increasingly popular. The interiors were modern and functional, with patterned carpets, comfortable seating, and often a separate bar area where guests could enjoy a pre-dinner drink. What made Post House restaurants significant was their consistency and accessibility. They weren't trying to be cutting edge or exclusive. They offered good, honest food at reasonable prices in pleasant surroundings. For many Britons in the 1970s, a meal at a Post House restaurant might be part of a special weekend away or a reliable choice when travelling for business. The Post House brand eventually disappeared in the early 2000s when the hotels were rebranded as Holiday Inn, bringing an end to a dining experience that, while never particularly exciting, had been a reassuring presence on Britain's hospitality landscape for decades. While primarily known as an electrical retailer, Rumbllos ventured into the catering business in the 1970s with a chain of cafes that were often attached to their stores. These cafes became popular meeting spots in town centres across Britain, offering shoppers a place to rest and refuel during their retail expeditions. The Rumbllos cafes were bright, modern spaces with plastic seating, formica tables, and a self-service counter where customers would slide their trays along and select items. The decor typically featured the company's distinctive red and white colour scheme, creating a unified brand identity with the adjoining electrical stores. The menu was simple but satisfying. Sandwiches, jacket potatoes with various fillings, sausage rolls, and a selection of cakes and pastries. Tea was served in thick white cups and the coffee was instant, a far cry from today's artisanal brews. What made these cafes special was their convenience and value for money, providing a no-frills but reliable eating option for shoppers. As Rumbllos struggled to compete in the increasingly competitive electrical retail market, the cafes were among the first casualties. By the early 1990s, they had disappeared from British high streets, and in 1995, the Rumbllos brand itself was consigned to retail history. These 16 restaurants weren't just places to eat. They were the backdrop to countless family celebrations, first dates, business deals, and everyday meals that formed the fabric of British life in the 1970s. Their disappearance represents not just changing tastes in food, but a fundamental shift in how we experience dining out. Today's generation will never know the excitement of spotting a little chef sign on a long journey, the sophistication of a prawn cocktail at Berni Inn, or the grandeur of tea at Lyons Corner House. While we may have gained convenience, variety, and in many cases better food, we've lost something of the unique character that made British dining in the 1970s so special. These restaurants may be gone, but for those who experienced them, the memories, and perhaps a lingering taste for Black Forest Gâteau, remain.